Is the legal ownership model outdated? Humans are possessive, but is possessiveness killing us? As children we are taught to share our toys and to play with one another, but it is not a lesson that finds much soil to grow in. As we grow, as adults we soon lose what we share. As adults we amass personal possessions. It is not just avarice. We soon find out that we need our own car, tools, furniture and many other things, if we are going to function in this world. Private property permits us to live independent lives. But the older we get, the more the problem of how to get rid of all of our possessions becomes the question. Is there a better way to administrate wealth and allocate goods and services? Must the choice between a free market free and a life in which the state owns and controls everything? Both these systems have their own particular kinds of injustice. But neither has no redeeming qualities, though each system has its supporters who believe only their choice has virtue and the other is unmitigated evil. Yet, no one doubts there is only one planet to fight over and only one body of assets that is available to us. We are all part of a local community. Our fate is intrinsically tied to how well the community functions as a unit. Society is composed of social networks. Social networks are just a modern version of the ancient and natural way humans organized. No one naturally forms a corporation or state, these are artificial constructs or legal fabrications. Our forms of ownership are based on these two legal entities, the state and the legal person or business. The law misrepresents the nature of ownership. The law grounds ownership on a person's rights under the law. The law either designates the state as the owner of the nation, or the state permits a legal entity to claim a pool of resources. But there is no legal, moral or rational justification for this. The ownership of property as a legal right created by law, is a fiction derived directly from the divine right of kings. The legal ownership of property is not just sleight of hand, it is witchcraft. The law is nothing more than someone's opinion as what is acceptable, formulated into a regulation and turned into an act by a formula created by the same legal machinery that lays behind all law. But without force of arms the law remains nothing more than a statement of preference. The universality of injunctions against murder are only because of the prevalence of such laws on the books of governments. In fact, no government is against the killing of humans, it is only those incidences of it that the state did not sanction that are prohibited. The actual death of another man is not of any greater significance than the death of a cow. Governments that drop bombs and shell cities does not consider human life sacrosanct. The government's position on ownership only reflects its calculus on how best to create social stability. If it sees property ownership as a source of dissension, it will not be permitted. But the social order rests on the shoulders of the military. Maintaining peace in the domestic arena is vital if peace in the foreign arena is to be maintained. If the maintenance of a standing army had no cost, then doubtless the army would be stationed in every community. But such costs are not sustainable, and so the state has to work out alternative arrangements. It was found that property ownership gave people a vested interest in the peace of the polity. Another thing that seemed to generate a positive outcome was democracy. Democracy gave rulers a sense of legitimacy, it also put the onus on the people for the kind of leader that was elected. One got the kind of leader one deserved. Not entirely true, but it was a useful myth to promulgate. Because people owned property and voted in the government, they had a sense of citizenship. Property ownership especially, gave the lower orders a sense of ownership in the wider polity. It not only made raising armies easier, it gave the soldier something substantial to fight for. Perhaps it was that sense that a small piece of England belonged to him, that made the English soldier, and by extension, the British Army, its unparalleled success. Pound for pound, there has never been a more successful military body than the British Army. But if you have ever played the game of Monopoly, you know a small amount of luck can easily catapult you into the winning position, regardless of how the players all start out equally. Sheer blind chance will give one person the few lucky breaks that ensures that he will win the game. The real world is complicated than a game of Monopoly, but the principles are still the same. There are more opportunities to stand out from the crowd and win relative to many other players, based on personal factors, but luck is not eliminated, and it still plays a major role. This luck is not determined by a roll of the dice, it is linked to the timing of decisions and the gambles we make regarding the future. A person who buys land today may hit it big or lose. Overall, the purchase of land gives one an advantage over those who do not. Just as a higher education is likely to help more than harm. But the actual outcome is never simple. Land ownership can mean you own an oil field or a swamp. You might sell your land just before it becomes a site for a new urban development or part of the approach for the new runway at the international airport. Like any game of chance, our success relies in part on luck but even more on our reserves. The man with but one sheep cannot endure the attack of a wolf. The man with 3,000 head can endure the attack of a whole pack of wolves. A family might struggle and buy a small plot of land and work this for generations, but they will always be poor and will always have the wolf at the door. Many businesses fail simply because they are too small to succeed. If your investment is so small it barely enables the investor to eke out a living, it will never survive a setback. The small landowner eats off his principal whereas the large landowner constantly reinvests his surpluses. At some point his surpluses, as they grow larger and larger, begin to eat up more and more investments that seem viable. It's all a matter of degree. The small business fails to the larger and the more this happens the larger becomes the business that appears small and is bought up by the larger. This is called the concentration of wealth, and it is nothing new. At some point a lucky few amass enough wealth they can survive just about every calamity and downturn and return to the accumulation of wealth with renewed vigor. Even now property is being bought up by investors as more and more people struggle to get by. The failure of the many is an opportunity for the few to amass even more holdings. We have two options facing us. We can as nations strive to increase populations to ever higher levels, without limit, or we can learn to live with a declining or stable populations. If the former, then this wealth accumulation could conceivably continue. The infinite numbers of those at the bottom could provide the means to make an ever smaller number of persons richer and richer, without end. However, if the population remains stable or even declines, the opportunities for the concentration of wealth must be curtailed, even reversed. This reversal cannot happen under the present economic model. If anyone can purchase anything given the availability of the necessary capital, then we are only a few short years from the reinstitution of the Middle Ages when a few very powerful men owned and controlled everything. There is only one feasible way to slow down the slide into globalism and the concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands, and that is by a government program that is likely to cause more damage than it reverses. The government in this system licenses ownership. The people can transfer these licenses more or less as they wish. But the way the economy is set up, the pressure is always on the poorest and weakest to liquidate whatever assets they have to finance current spending. The rich will tell you that to get wealthy one has to defer gratification, but the rich neither have to defer gratification of struggle to find capital to invest. The poor on the other hand, are rarely able to delay current expenditures for long as they are usually in arrears as it is. Many people find themselves living on credit, which of course in a form of inflation, as the interest payments adds cost to everything they purchase. To counter this the state does what the state always does, it steals money from Peter to subsidize Paul, making things worse for everyone. There is only one stable social configuration and that is revealed in Scripture. The basic model is referred to as the church. This is not an institution of the state but an alternative social model. Apologetics is a business that changes everything. We cannot explain Scripture by words alone. Apologetics is the way we live our life. Apologetics is a system or process by which we solve problems. We cannot justify faith by using or employing the institutions of Babylon. If we are not organized for success, we cannot succeed. A core feature of this is the need separate from those whose institutions destine them for failure. We need to analyze institutions for their value. This is especially so when it comes to ownership. Our approach to ownership destines us to success or failure. If we see property as public, then there are no limits on our access or mode of use. Therefore, this is not a viable approach. Thus, man has instituted the state as a private owner to regulate particular usage. But the state is not a private owner because the state is a legal person, not a real one. The same goes for the corporation. But even individuals, as subjects of the state, are not true private owners, as they are products of the state. Legal ownership is always a kind of public, if restricted, ownership. Private ownership is, in Babylon, merely a modified form of public ownership, licensed and administrated by the state. To have true private ownership we need to eliminate the state and its legal ownership models, both the private and the public form of state ownership. The only viable form of ownership, which straddles the private and public models, is the ecclesiastical ownership model. This is ownership by the church, not the tepid version of the church, but the biblical church. We own only what we create. We own nothing we do not create, and no one created any part of nature but God. Therefore, God owns the universe and all in it, but what we create in His name for His purpose and His glory. Man cannot create things with real substance, but we can add value to what God created. We own the value we created, and no one can claim this, but we can dispose of it and allocate it as we choose. This creation of value creates the church and defines us as a member of the church. Those who produce value have ecclesiastical authority because we have authority over the value we added to the physical world that was formed by God.